Tricia, thank you so much for coming here to speak with me today. I wanted to hear a little bit more about the New Mexico Surface Water Quality Permitting Program that's currently in development and some of the history for why the needs for this program arose.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be talking about this important issue. So as you may remember, in 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court passed a really important decision called Sackett versus EPA. And essentially what that decision did was remove many of the waters that had previously been covered under the Clean Water Act for decades. And arguably, there was no state in the nation that was made more vulnerable than New Mexico. And that's because it was really focused on intermittent and ephemeral waterways, or those waters that don't run year-round, which, as you probably know, is most of New Mexico's waters. So the translation was up to 96% of our waterways lost federal protection, and that's protection that has served the state well for over 50 years under the Clean Water Act. So really monumental.
Right, and we're standing here in the Santa Fe River as an example of one of the many waterways in the state that don't flow year-round. The river channel's dry and has been dry for some time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think whether you're talking about the Santa Fe River, which is much beloved by Santa Fe residents, whether you're talking about some of our iconic rivers like the Rio Grande and the Pecos, the bottom line is ephemeral and intermittent waterways play a role in all of those things, right? They feed those major rivers. They are the lifelines. You can think of them as the arteries of life across our state. And when they're degraded and polluted, that means that's just going to kind of continue to snowball, and we're going to have bigger pollution events as we go.
Sure, everything flows downstream, right? So the state is in the middle of a rulemaking process trying to stand up this new program. What would that do?
So we passed that bill, Senate Bill 21, last year. It's now the law of the land. We have a state-led surface water quality permitting program. And now the real work begins, and we get to actually kind of put it in place. And so that's what the Environment Department is doing. There's still a lot of work to do to get mapping applications ready so that we can be a little bit more clear where there is still federal jurisdiction and where we're talking about state-only jurisdiction. We've got to get databases up and running so that those permits can be easily accessible. And then, of course, we've got to staff up and get all of those people trained. I think one of the things that I'm really excited about is previously, before Senate Bill 21 was passed, New Mexico was one of only 3 states in the nation that left the permitting of its federally protected waters up to the EPA. So what that meant was permits weren't issued here in New Mexico. They were issued from a federal EPA office in Dallas, Texas. And so that bill not only created this state program for the waters that no longer have federal protection, but it also took over permitting for those few remaining waters that do still have protection under the Clean Water Act. So now if you are a discharger and you need to figure out, you've got questions about your permit, you've got a one-stop shop, and you know who you can talk to, somebody at the Environment Department that lives in these areas, that knows these waters, and get your questions answered.
Right, and it's the state of New Mexico making choices about the state of New Mexico's waterways.
Exactly.
And it has to do with some of these facilities like wastewater treatment plants, right? So these are really integral municipal facilities that we're talking about permits for, is that right?
Totally. Yeah, so we're talking about industry, we're talking about the treatment facilities that provide drinking water for communities, but we're also talking about, you know, the water that is supporting species and habitat. I mean, it's become a cliche at this point, but water is life. So we have to make sure that our communities are supported and that water is clean. And I think at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're restoring the protections that have existed in the state for 50 years. And those protections have served New Mexico really well. You know, agriculture has thrived, industry has thrived, and communities have thrived. So we're just making sure that is retained.
Right, so hugely important program. The thing that's working through the legislature right now is the question of how to fund it, right? So tell me a little bit about like the current line item request that's working its way through the legislature.
Yeah, so was excited to see in the executive budget a $1.5 million request for the Surface Water Quality Program, and that combined with other funding that has been previously appropriated is going to carry the Environment Department through the next fiscal year. The legislature has been consistent about the importance importance of this issue. They've been funding, looking into it and investigating how we could get this done for the past few legislative sessions. So that 1.5 million did come over from the House for HB2, and so that's awesome. We just need to make sure that stays in the budget, and that'll help get the surface water quality program set up and do all of those things that I mentioned: mapping, databases, hiring, training, et cetera, et cetera.
And hiring and training and running this program, like, these are not insignificant numbers, right? Like, the number of full-time employees required, I've heard characterized as like kind of shocking.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about somewhere around 60 FTEs to run the program. Not all of those folks need to be new. Some of those folks are already working at the Environment Department, and it's just repurposing their job a little bit. But this is a big task that they're taking on. Issuing these permits is important, and I think we need to make sure that the Environment Department is resourced and staffed appropriately so that they can do it right. In particular, it would be a shame if we moved all of this permitting here in-house and then industry and the permittees are not able to get the support that they need. I think it's really important that we support our permitted community like that.
What kind of debate or like pushback is the bill facing? Like, is anyone raising opposition to it?
I think we saw some pushback last year with the setting up of the framework of the program, and there was some details that we had to work with industry on. But I will say I really want to give a lot of kudos to the Environment Department for working really hard to hear all the voices. So even before they brought the bill in 2025 legislative session, they set up the Surface Water Advisory Panel, or the SWAP. And that brought together folks like me who are representing the environmental NGO community, but also brought Pueblo to the table, brought some of the federal agencies to the table, brought those municipal folks who are thinking about drinking water for their communities, and brought some of the industry to the table so that we could talk about what are the needs, what does this need to look like so it works for New Mexico. And so I'm really hopeful. The last step in the process is to set up a rulemaking process, and that'll get into the fine-grained, nitty-gritty details that are a little bit too narrow to put in statute. But I'm hopeful that all of that pre-work is going to mean that we have a little bit of a smoother run in the kind of final steps.
Great. There is kind of a nuts and bolts question in play. What's the sticking point at now?
Yeah,
right now?
So the legislature needs to decide, do we want to keep the status quo, which is no permit fees, and that would mean that the state is on the hook for paying that $8 million a year, or do we want to put that burden fully on dischargers and have permit fees cover the full cost of the program, or is there some kind of middle ground? My organization, New Mexico Wild, and the partners that we work with, we believe that the best approach is a hybrid approach, and in particular, we'd love to see something that recognizes the public good that wastewater treatment facilities provide, and see reduced fees for those folks, especially for small communities. I think even relatively small fees could have a big impact. But that's ultimately a decision for the legislature. We've heard from some of the bill sponsors, maybe we want to keep this is the status quo, which is no fees. And that's ultimately something that they're going to have to decide on how they want to approach that.
So a lot of discussing to get through in the next week.
Yeah.
Got it. And how does this program now square in like the ongoing federal landscape with, definitions of where the Clean Water Act applies?
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing with the federal rulemaking is just kind of an underscore of how important this state-led surface water quality permitting program is. And you can kind of think of these rulemakings as solidifying the Sackett decision. So post-Sackett, we could say, we're pretty sure that up to 96% of our waterways are going to be no longer protected under the Clean Water Act. But with these rules, it just really solidifies that, and we can say with a lot more certainty, New Mexico is largely unprotected. There's also kind of some wonky back and forth about the way that definitions are working that don't quite work with Southwest hydrology. And so I think it just further underscores the importance importance of having the folks that live here, that know these waters, that know the hydrology, that know also the industry and the needs of the dischargers. They're the ones running the permitting program and leading this effort.